in the beginning of the Chovs, the places, the Kemis Kavuyim, the set places that everybody had for Farbrengen, it was not so clear. That time already, which line you belonged to, which line you stood on, was more or less set up. These Bochrim stood on the floor, these Bochrim stood on the first bench, these Bochrim stood on the second bench. But exactly which part of the bench you have, whether you have the beginning or the further on, would depend by who comes first Shabbos morning. So Bochrim would come Shabbos morning early to catch their place, to be the earlier, the closer one to the Rebbe on their shuras, on their benches or on their lines that they stood. Doesn't mean that they had to come and stand on their place. But what it meant is, whoever would come to 770 first in the morning, so he was the one before on the line. Anybody who came from that line after him, stood after him. And every week it would change. Till later on, it's set up already that there was Mekemus Kavuyim, and then when I got my place in the first line, that was later. But I'm talking about the beginning of the Chovs. So I remember once that a few of us were in 770, early morning Shabbos, 6:30 to catch places. So we're standing in 770. We were standing, I remember, next to the Omid, and we were talking, and it was 6:30 in the morning. And all of a sudden we give a look, we see the Rebbe walks into the shul. In other words, the Rebbe came to 770, 6:30 in the morning. He walked in 770, and instead of turning left, turning to his room, he probably heard us talking, so he turned right, and he walked into the shul. He walks into the shul, gives a look at us. Obviously, we stood up right away, and he looked at us, looked at the clock to see what time it is, continued walking through the shul, and we stood there like soldiers, but he walked through the shul. He walked through the whole shul. When he passed by the bench, it's under the windows between the shul and the second room, the Cheder Sheni. On the bench, a bocher was sleeping. So the Rebbe looked down and looked at the bocher sleeping. Then the Rebbe continued, went into the Cheder Sheni. There was a box there of cake that was ready for the bochrim to eat before Chassidus. He looked at the box, then went into the hallway, turned left into the hallway, walked down the hallway. When he came by the door that goes down the steps to the shul downstairs, the Rebbe opened the door, listened with his ears what's going on downstairs, and he continued further through the hallway and went into his room. And Bechlal, sometimes the Rebbe would come, even by Seder Chassidus, the Rebbe would come Shabbos morning, walk through the Zal to see who is there by Seder Chassidus. Didn't happen too often, but sometimes. Sometimes he didn't go all the way in, but he would come in the morning at the middle of Seder Chassidus. He would turn towards the shul, go to the beginning of the shul, look in. People should know that he looked, and then he would go back into his room.